Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our user group today, where we will discuss all things Cloud IDE. With us on the Acquia side today, we have Matt Grasmick, Director of Product Management at Acquia, and Aurelien Navarre, Product Manager at Acquia. So we're going to open it up with to a Q&A at the end of our presentation. So if you have any questions, that come to mind throughout the presentation that Matt and Aurelien will go over, please feel free to pop it into the chat, or you can bring it up at the end when we open it up to discussion. So thank you again for joining us. And with that, Matt, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. This is actually going to be relatively quick. It's about a little 10-minute presentation of just what Acquia Cloud IDE is, and I'll give you a 5-minute demo, and then we'll go right into Q&A, and we can be very informal, a discussion with everyone on the call. So let's get started. Usually when I say that and I press next, it goes to the next slide. There we go. So first off, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Which is, I think we're all developers here on the call, or many of us, at least technical. And I've been a Drupal developer and a community member for about 10 years. And despite loving Drupal, I have to admit that Drupal development can be very difficult. And that's kind of putting it kindly. And frankly, a large and unnecessary part of that difficulty doesn't have a lot to do with Drupal itself. It has to do with the effort that goes into getting a Drupal application running locally, keeping it running and up to date amidst a flurry of changing technologies and versions. So just to look at a concrete scenario here, let's say that you, the Drupal developer, want to start building a new Drupal site. You've got your laptop or your local machine, and the first thing you want to do is you want to grab a copy of Drupal and download it and get it installed. Well, it's actually not that simple of a process, because the first thing you have to do is make a very important decision, and there's a lot of options, and that is which local development environment you're going to use. There's pros and cons all over the place here. Of course, Dev Desktop is something Acquia started offering over a decade ago. We've gone through phases of what's recommended, right? We've got virtual machines that you can manage with Vagrant via Drupal VM, or various Docker solutions like DDEV and Lando, or roll your own. Or if you're on Windows, maybe you have to use the Windows subsystem for Linux, or maybe you're going to roll your own and install MySQL and Postgres and PHP and that sort of thing on Linux, which I think Aurelien likes to do. So there's a lot of decisions to make, and there's all sorts of not great scenarios that can happen here, and you're probably familiar with at least one, if not all of these. So if you're a Windows user, you're probably just going to have a bad time. I mean, frankly, regardless of Drupal and tools like Drush, which aren't built really or optimized to run on Windows, a lot of ancillary tools like Node.js and NPM just aren't built with Windows users in mind. It's generally just harder to develop on Windows. Even if you're not on Windows, or if you are, a lot of people run into trouble with not having the permission to do what they have to do. This is particularly a problem with a virtual machine, where you have to download hundreds, if not thousands, of dependencies. But downloading, installing, and configuring is difficult, because you might not have permission to access through your firewall, because you don't have the admin account on your machine. Who knows? And let's say you even get past that. Well, the fact is, running virtual machines is really slow. You're talking about allocating a large portion of your memory and processing power and storage on your machine to run a virtual machine inside of it. So downloading, installing is slow, and running can be really slow. And last but not least, we all run into problems on our machine, no matter what we chose. And unfortunately, when you're running on your own machine, all of your problems are idiosyncratic. They have to do with your file directory, your security settings, your operating system, your version, your particular configuration. It's kind of inescapable. So the experience looks kind of like this. Your local machine feels like it blows up, and you feel like you've been run over by a truck. We want to change that. We want to provide a solution for that pain, like this flex tape being slapped on a tube of water. And that's where Acquia Cloud IDE comes in, and that's where Aurelien gets to talk about how cool our solution is.
Thank you, Matt. Hello again, everyone. So yeah, like you, we're Drupalists, and what we want to focus on is shipping new features rather than struggling with our dev environment. So we've decided to fix this issue once and for all. And this is why we've created the only web-based integrated development environment for Drupal. So it's called Acquia Cloud IDE, and it allows you to write, run, and debug Drupal applications as a service. With it, you don't need to set up your local machine at all. With only a browser, you can have access to a fully functional IDE within minutes. Next, please. So with Cloud IDE, you've essentially been resurrected from the bowels of local dev hell into the cloud. It is a fully managed server and IDE, which we're taking care of setting up, updating, configuring, upgrading, and constantly optimizing for Drupal development. And what this means in practice is you're empowered to do your job without any friction or blockers. And this is how it looks. Those familiar with Visual Studio Code might see some similarities here. You have access to a file explorer, a powerful source code editor, a terminal, and even a web preview right within the IDE. And all of this with only visiting your personal IDE URL in the browser. Next, please. And we believe that this is the best IDE to develop Drupal, and there are many reasons why. First, it immediately runs on all systems since it only requires a browser. Second, it is fully optimized and configured out of the box, so you can jump in and start developing Drupal right away. Third, there's no longer any environmental disparity to be concerned of. And more importantly, there's no learning curve or maintenance required since we take care of everything for you. And last but not least, it's fast. Just try and download a 30 gigs database locally and compare the time it takes in Cloud IDE. And that really is a game changer. Also, it's dedicated hardware, so there's no personal email client, video app, or even Fortnite installed alongside your work environment. It truly is your private dev space with your own SSH keys and API tokens, and it's tied to your Cloud Platform account, so only you can access it securely. And Cloud IDE ships with everything Drupal developers need. First, there's a traditional LAMP stack that is fully compatible with Drupal 9. Git is available either at the command line or via the UI. We even support Node.js and Ruby, and also common package managers for your more complex applications and development workflows. And on top of that, we have pre-configured all the Drupal tooling you need. So obviously we support Drush and PHP Code Sniffer, but we also have full support for Composer 1 and 2. Xdebug comes pre-configured out of the box, which incidentally is one of the most popular features of Cloud IDE. And we even have pre-configured the Chrome drivers so you can easily run all Drupal functional JS tests. And finally, Cloud IDE ships with the powerful Acquia CLI, which allows you to interact with 200 plus Cloud Platform API endpoints to manage your Acquia applications and services. It also greatly simplifies managing your IDE. So whether you'd like to, for instance, switch PHP versions, restart your LAMP stack, or pull your code base DBN files from your cloud platform or site factory applications into the IDE, it is just a simple command away. There's no more complicated rsync commands to craft, no more SSH tunnel to set up. Things just work. And for GitHub users, we also have integrated Acquia Cloud IDE with the new GitHub CLI to streamline operations. So I'll hand it over to Matt now so you can see Cloud IDE in action.
Thank you very much. Video cannot be loaded. I think I'm going to refresh this. So far, so good. Oh, look at that. Talk amongst yourselves. This is what happens when you get signed out every 24 hours of your account. So in 30 seconds, I'll have the demo up.
I have a question for you. You mentioned Xdebug. Is that on by default? Is that something you can turn off? Because I know Xdebug can slow things down a bit.
It's almost like you were a plant and told to ask that question. He was not, folks, but it is pre-configured, but it's disabled by default because we know there's a very significant performance impact. Actually, as an aside, Xdebug 3 RC was released like yesterday, and there's around a 30 to 40% performance increase in the new version, which will be available on Cloud IDEs very soon after there's a stable. But we have it disabled, but it's very easy to turn on because there's actually an Acquia CLI command. It's just ACLI Xdebug, and that turns on Xdebug for you inside of the Cloud IDE, and all of the rest of the PHP configuration is set to go. So you're ready to toggle it on and off just with an Acquia CLI command.
Sweet.
All right. Can you all see this video?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so this is about a 5-minute demo. I'm going to start off by showing you how you actually create a brand new Cloud IDE. And right now, the best way to do that is to actually use Acquia CLI. So in this video, I'm on my local machine. I have Acquia CLI installed, which is just a FAR file that's easy to download and execute. And I've run the IDE:create command and passed in an argument, which is my application name. EEM Grasmick is my employee account. I've given it a label of demo. It's gone and created a new IDE for me, and it's given me 2 URLs. One is the URL of the IDE where I can go write the code, and the other is the URL of the Drupal site hosted inside of the IDE, which I can click through, log into, and do my Drupal configuration. So I click that link, it pops open in my browser, and here it is. I've got an IDE and a new machine with Drupal running in it. So a quick look at the interface here. First of all, just note that we're in a browser, and this is really awesome that we can access a machine and look at the files and edit them just through a browser. But of course, like a local IDE, I can pop open a file like index.php. I can hover over a class, take a look at the definition of that, pop into the file where that's been defined, scroll through it, etc. I can search through the files. Of course, I could do it in other ways, like with a find command, but I can search through the contents of files to find out where the string autoload appears, for instance, double click on the result, open it. And perhaps one of the coolest things, I can actually open a terminal and run commands. This is in my browser tab. I can run commands. So for instance, I'm using Composer 2 here to download and install the CTools module. And it's actually the default Composer version now in IDEs is Composer 2, but it's done it. And if I want to look at the changes in my repository, I can do it visually to say, now I have a Drupal CTools line in my Composer JSON that wasn't there before. And I can even use this interface to enter a commit message, stage the change, and commit this change via Git. So I'm just pressing the check button here to make that commit. And for those of you who are command line enthusiasts and don't believe it, I can run git log and you can see that the commit is there and the commit message is there as well. And if I run git show, you can see exactly the same diff on the command line that we showed in the diff visualizer. So next scenario, let's say you want to pull from Acquia Cloud. You can click a button, copy from Acquia Cloud. It just runs an ACLI command, which rightly detects that we don't have a local project set up yet. So it asks, do you want to clone? And I say yes. It knows what application I'm tied to, and it says, which environment do you want to clone from? It asks me that because it wants to know which branch to check out. So I said the stage environment. It shows me that the Drupal 9 branch is already checked out on that environment. So it clones and checks out that branch. And it also automatically detects that I have multiple databases on that environment and asks me which one I want to copy down. I tell it that I want to copy down the default one. And it even automatically detects that I am using Composer to manage dependencies, and it runs Composer install for me after the clone is done so that I'm ready to open and run a Drupal site. So I click a button, open the Drupal site, a new tab opens, and here it is. This is an exact copy of the Drupal site that was on my stage environment. I can log in with the same username and password that were there, and it's running. The Composer dependencies are present and everything. Okay, last scenario. Debugging, probably the coolest feature. I actually found a lot of people have never used Xdebug. So if you're not familiar with it, this is probably one of the most powerful debugging features in PHP generally. It's something that allows you to step line by line through PHP code execution. So as in the answer to Adam's question, first thing we have to do here is run ACLI xdebug. That's going to make a quick change to our PHP INI and load the Xdebug extension. So that's done. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a decision about what file we want to debug. Let's say something easy. We're going to debug the index.php file. And we're going to make a red dot there by clicking in the left-hand column to insert a breakpoint. And that tells the IDE, this is where I want you to stop during PHP execution. Last thing we do is we press play there under Xdebug to listen for an incoming connection. And then when we open the Drupal site in a new tab, which of course executes the index.php, the IDE pauses on this line, and I can click the button to step line by line through the execution of this file. I can step into a function as I just did, and I can even inspect the values of the variables at this moment in the execution. And of course, I can look at the call stack, see which file I started on versus which file I'm in, and I can continue to move line by line through the PHP execution. This is basically an alternative to the old way of writing print statements in your PHP code, hitting refresh and seeing what gets spewed out into the browser. This is sort of the much improved way to do debugging. So that's the demo. Before we get into Q&A, just let's talk about how you could get started if you're interested in this. Almost all of our Acquia Cloud accounts, all of the Acquia Cloud Enterprise and the Site Factory ones already have one IDE available included. And if you go to our docs site, docs.acquia.com/acquiacli, it will show you how to download, install it, and do exactly what you saw me do in the demo, which is to run the IDE create command, get that IDE and pop it open in a browser and start playing around. If you want more than one IDE, because you have a larger development team or lots of projects, you can talk to an account manager at TAM, or you can even just submit a support ticket and request that you start a conversation about getting more. So with that, we can move into Q&A. Hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was great. How about bringing my own editor? Am I able to connect to an external SSH? I mean, I really like the stack, the tooling, the remote hardware, all for free, but VIA isn't quite VS Code. So is that in the roadmap that I could use VS Code's remote ability?
That's a question we've gotten a lot, and I know it's valuable and it's something we'd like to provide. Frankly, I don't think we're going to provide it soon. It's in the roadmap, but the reason we're not going to provide it soon is security concerns, basically. So what we'd like to do before doing that is we would like to go through a process of making these kind of ironclad and FedRAMP compliant in particular. And then we can look at changing the security model so that people can SSH in remotely. But since we're giving development machines kind of for the first time, and we want to make sure that they're really safe and secure. And the model right now is each IDE is actually tied to a particular user. So you use your user account for Cloud ID for Acquia Cloud to authenticate, and you can feel safe in kind of putting your private SSH keys there, and putting private code there as well. So, sorry, long answer. Not available now. Possibly available in the future, but probably not at least for 12 months.
So I've got a question that's twofold, and kind of based on, I guess I'm curious what kind of like the DevOps model kind of looks behind the scenes for this. So it's like, obviously, I'm guessing this is going to integrate with Acquia's Git repo. So for those of us who are much more familiar with working things on the BLT side with an external repo and building the artifact and deploying that, how does that look with this model, especially when it comes to things like config management, config split?
All right, I'll answer the first part of that question, and then maybe I'll ask a follow-up to clarify for the second part around config. But you should think of this as your own machine, really. It just happens to not be local. It happens to be in the cloud. And that if you want to connect to a different Git remote, like one hosted by GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, et cetera, you can just do a Git remote add, and you can create a new SSH key or reuse the existing one to make sure that that machine is able to communicate with the remote over the SSH protocol. And then you can go about whatever workflow you want. You can Git push to GitHub. You can BLT deploy to Acquia Cloud. It's sort of whatever development workflow you want to use is available there. For config import and export, can you be more specific with the question? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you concerned about?
Yeah, well, no, I guess maybe I'm looking at it at this the wrong way, as opposed to being sort of like just like a more universal dev instance. You know, I kind of went down the path of you guys had kind of cloned from stage, so that looked like a dev instance that we would pull down. We would instance from, say, a tag or repo or whatever from on the Acquia side, as opposed to being able to integrate from the other thing. So I was kind of curious when it come to config and looking. I guess maybe like I said, maybe I'm looking at it a little bit the wrong way, but when we were in my previous environments, when we typically worked on the BLT side, we're an entirely external piece. We build that artifact. We have post-run scripts that run to push things into our Acquia environment, and then push our config. So when doing a deployment in that scenario and wanting to commit those changes out to Acquia from that dev environment, does that change?
It doesn't really. I mean, think of the IDE less as a dev stage prod on Acquia Cloud and more as like your local machine. The artifact isn't on the IDE. The source code is, and you run composer install to make sure the dependencies are there the same way you would in your local machine, but you're not really running the artifact in the IDE. And when it comes to getting the artifact, like generating an artifact and putting it on Acquia Cloud, it's just the same process you use from your local machine. Either you could run like a BLT deploy in the IDE the same way you would locally to generate the artifact and push it, in which case that would trigger cloud hooks once it's received on cloud and do the config import or cache clear or whatever it is that you have set up. Or you can get pushed to GitHub, and if you have a pipelines job or a Travis CI job or something that handles that artifact generation, it would work that way.
Got it. Thanks. That makes more sense.
Hello.
Yep.
Sorry, I have a question. I joined a little bit late, so I'm hoping you guys will share the recording so I can watch it.
We will.
I would like to know, I don't know if you went over the limitations of the product. So the way I'm looking at this, it's a local instance, a local development environment, but it's like live dev. Is that an accurate assessment?
It's like that, but much better.
Okay, yeah, okay, we're gonna glorify live dev then with much better performance. Okay. And then what are the limitations? So many of the challenges that I have is we have Google APIs or whitelisting challenges for geocoding things. And I also have issues with ODEs with the limitations of not having Acquia cron scheduler and all that. Is that something that I will be able to set up using this cloud dev environment, Acquia cron scheduling, or like, I guess, what are the limitations is compared to an Acquia environment? Would be probably easier to understand.
Yeah, there's so many different dimensions on which I could answer that question. Performance is going to be much better than live dev for sure, and that has to. I mean, it's just like a totally different hardware stack that's really optimized for a writable file system. So that's a big difference. So most things are writable, not everything, but you've got a large number of directories that are writable. The main, and you can also you can get in and change the database from the command line. You can change all sorts of files, but including your PHP configuration, you can directly change the PHP INI, for instance. That's something you could never do on a different cloud account. I think the limitations you're going to run into are probably around networking limitations. And we've sort of pointed to that with an earlier question, the way that we lock down SSH access to it. If you have to whitelist, like you mentioned, you could have trouble there, mostly because that's another networking area. So I mean, just broad strokes.
Elastic IPs, right? No elastic IPs. Do you have Acquia cron scheduling? Can you schedule tasks? So if you're pushing data through cron jobs, right now doing just real-time requests, is that capable as well or no?
So I'm not sure if you can edit the cron tab, but the way you would do it is just through the command line inside the IDE, but I wouldn't recommend it. And the reason is that when you stop using your IDE, it kind of goes idle after, I think it's 240 minutes. It only takes about 30 seconds to spin back up, but they kind of go to sleep when they haven't been used after 240 minutes. So it's not great to use as a task server that's always awake and ready to run a cron job.
No, that's not what I meant. So
Okay.
like I use Salesforce, for example, and we push leads, right? So if you use the Salesforce module as an example, you have ways to push data. you can use it doing the standard Drupal queue, right? Using the Salesforce suite through a cron job as an example, or a Drush hook or something like that, right? So that's what I was talking about. So instead of manually having to do the pushing of the leads while you're developing, I would like to have that running. Like locally, you can basically do like a do while loop, right? And just have it keep checking.
I mean, you could do, if that's what you do locally, you could do it in the IDE. You
Okay.
can have a loop like that. Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't know the type of level of access we had. So, and you do have access to the file system to put SS like certs and stuff, right? Or do we have to use
not
variables?
I mean, yeah, not every directory is writable, but certainly far more of them are than with a cloud environment. So you're talking about installing a certificate?
Yeah. So let's say you're setting up a portal and you need certificates for the authentication or like JWT flow. Where would you put those certificates, right? If you don't have SSH access?
Well, you do have command line access, just not via SSH. So you can use that command line that you saw in the demo that you access through the browser actually, and you can, echo a value into a file and at some writable location and leverage that. And I think I'd have to get into exactly the details of your workload to figure out if that's good enough or not. But you have command line access. It's just not command line access via SSH.
Okay. Yeah, I'll watch the demo. Like I said, I missed some of it, so maybe it'll answer it. And then the last question is server variables. So do you have like that available, or would I just do a standard env file to replicate that like I would on my local environment?
You can set a server variable yourself because you have command line access. We have some preset, not exactly all the same that are in other cloud environments, but there are some there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I see a question from Joe here saying, I have multi-site environment I've configured with Drush aliases. Would I be able to set up a Drush alias? Sorry, someone just wrote more and it pushed it. That would work for, it's okay, for Cloud IDE. And so let's see. I got to make sure I understand the question. Let me answer kind of broadly. From your local machine, since you don't have SSH access, you're not going to be able to use an alias to connect to the IDE. From inside of the IDE, you can set up any kind of alias you want to connect with remote machines or different multi-sites on your current machine. And actually, Acquia CLI has like a little bit of magic that makes this easier. We wanted to get away from people having to use Drush aliases and particularly having to download, install them on a machine. So you can run an Acquia CLI command to connect to other machines like Acquia CLI, you write Drush and then like grasmick.dev, like the alias, and it will run a Drush command on a remote machine. Or you can write Acquia CLI SSH, grasmick.dev, and it would SSH into your dev machine. And what's nice about that, it does that even if Drush isn't installed. They're not actually using Drush aliases. It's kind of mimicking Drush aliases, but auto discovering all the server information that it needs to connect. So without installing Drush and without installing Drush aliases, you can effectively use something like a Drush alias via Acquia CLI. I don't know if I answered your question in the multi-site context though. So Joe, I don't know if you want to follow up on that. Or is that good? Okay, cool, that works.
Yeah, I have a question. So you mentioned that there's no SSH access. What sort of tools are there to support like SQL in the IDE? Are there any, does it like do any syntax highlighting? I'm someone who is kind of lazy, so I don't like to use a terminal for that. I like to use like SQL Pro, especially like when I have to like run a random query and I have no idea what tables I'm even dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Well, so right now it's command line access is the way that you would do it. I think it's definitely a feature. I don't think it's been asked for, but it's one that I know I would like with like a PHP MyAdmin. I'm not sure.
I just answered the question in chat, so I can expand on this. So yeah, we don't have any way to connect to MySQL via SQL Pro or any other GUI
Right.
tool.
Yeah.
But we do have on the roadmap to evaluate installing something for you in the UI so you can manage your tables and overall MySQL install. And we've explored two things, phpMyAdmin and adminer. Adminer is a simple PHP file which has basically no security vulnerability, while phpMyAdmin is full of security vulnerabilities. So we have to make sure that A, we install something that works, something that is secure, and something that you can easily access via the UI. So this way you would have, you wouldn't need, to get to your local dev tools again. You would have everything within the UI in Cloud IDE.
That makes perfect sense.
But but I think to summarize that, like, we don't have it now, but I think we could add it pretty easily if it's something that's valuable. And it'll just be a matter of what we add, whether it's phpMyAdmin or a Thea plugin or something like that. But giving you a GUI for MySQL administration is something we could probably have on the short-term roadmap.
Yeah, it might be nice. I mean, it's hard to give up SQL Pro, but I mean, all this other stuff sounds awesome. So
just like the pancakes.
Yeah. The only other thing I was wondering about is, does the IDE have highlighting for Drupal coding standards out of the box?
Yes, it does.
Okay, and is there, if I want to use a different syntax that's not PHP, let's say, imagine for a second I'm a raving lunatic and I want to touch, I don't know, shell scripts or VCL. Is there a way that I can get that syntax highlighting, or sorry, no dice?
So yeah, you can answer, Aurelien.
Yeah, we do have support for OpenVSX, which is the open source equivalent of the Visual Studio Code repository for plugins. And we do have a lot of languages that are supported, and we do have syntax highlighting for them. If there's something that is missing, we have the possibility to install those OpenVSX extensions to add some missing capabilities. And so, yeah, if VCL files are not being supported right now, we can definitely explore this and make sure that we would have built-in support for that in the future. So I'm going to be tracking that down.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool about the plugins. And the last question, I promise. If, let's say I have a team of developers and I want to have some sort of like collective team configuration across their IDEs to kind of as like a jump start, is there any official product support for that? Or is that something where I would just simply write a script and have my team script like set up their environment for them?
I think for now, write a script, but that's one of the things that is on our roadmap as well. Something where you can have a file that's committed to your repository and we can read it and use that to set up default settings for the IDE.
Sweet.
To answer some questions in chat, we're getting a couple questions around front-end dependencies and Node. So NPM is installed and Node is installed inside of the IDEs. To answer Adam's question, let's say that you are using Compass or Sass or Babel. Presumably you have a theme. It has a package JSON file. Given that we have NPM installed on the box, you would run your NPM install and NPM either build or watch or whatever the script is that you use. And since you had downloaded and installed Compass or Babel or Sass or Grunt or whatever it is that you installed in package JSON, you could then run those things. So you're able to run whatever front-end tasks you need. And I might answer the question about Cloud IDE's support for Acquia Node architecture. I mean, Node is installed, so Node and NPM are installed, so you can get a JSX, what do you call it? Transpiler? I'm not a JSS expert, but I think that's right.
And this interface runs on top of TypeScript language, so that's supported out of the box. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? We got some time left. I like the informal kind of discussion style we got going on. Who's going to try this?
How about logging? Right.
What about logging?
So again, sorry, I missed the beginning of the. If you already answered this in the demo, then just say we already answered it and watch the video. What about like logging support and so forth? what like you have log streaming like in Acquia Cloud, right? So are you guys going to have something similar like that, or is it more or less like looking at Watchdog?
I mean, you could actually, since you have command line access in the IDE, you can tail a log right in the IDE interface.
Yep.
So it's kind of that thinking about it more like a local machine than a remote machine, sort of. We have planned improvements to how we're doing logging. We want to, improve where MySQL and Watchdog and other logs go. But for now, yes, you can use Watchdog. You can use the database entries, and for files that are readable, you can use the command line to tail a log. And you can even inside of the IDE, you can either have multiple browser tabs open, or you can actually have multiple terminal tabs open inside of one browser tab, so that you could be tailing in one and running commands in the other.
And we can restart Apache?
You
Yes,
can restart Apache. There's actually an Acquia CLI command. I
ID
wrote it.
service -restart PHP, and you're good to go.
There you go. I forgot it, but I wrote it. But yeah,
You
okay,
wrote
so
it,
there's there's an ACLI service restart command, and I think what we have for it is restarting Apache, PHP, or I don't know, was there another one, MySQL or something, in case you change configuration.
Got it. And then last question, and if you answered it again, can you have multiple developers working on the same box?
No. I mean, I think technically the answer might be yes, but you're not supposed to. That's by design. Given that
collaboration, make it the Google Doc of the future, right? So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, the reason why we haven't done that yet is because you have your personal SSH keys and API tokens from the cloud platform, and we don't want to expose that to anybody else, even if those are trusted colleagues in your team. The only thing that we have implemented yet to be able to share your work is we have two URLs with Cloud IDE. We have the IDE URL in which you edit your code and make modifications, and you have the preview site that you can view within the IDE itself or in a new tab. And we've implemented a share code, so you can share this preview site with your QA team, for instance, or with customers if you're building websites for them. So that's the only thing that we've been doing. We've been having this question before, doing collaborative development, because that's essentially this, would require us to be able to either invalidate the keys that you have configured already, or to find a way to securely hide them from other parties, willing to access the IDE. So we have to be cautious about not introducing any risk here. So we want to proceed one step after another to make sure that we'll be implementing this in the best possible manner.
Yeah, we don't want you all seeing each other's private SSH keys. That's pretty much the concern.
So that raises the interesting question. Are you limited to one IDE as yourself as a user, or could you potentially, you mentioned the QA response, so it would be nice to be able to have something sitting in one branch and being able to continue working in another branch, maybe in a separate environment.
Yeah, so you get one IDE for free per application. And I think we may change that model to give you 5 or 10 or 15 free IDEs, depending on your subscription level. But there will be a default limit, and then you can add more to your subscription. You can upgrade it to 25 or 50. The model is an IDE is tied to a user, and it's tied to an application. If you're entitled to 25 IDEs, that means one developer can have 10 of their own, and another developer can have 10 of their own. And that way, I kind of like to think of it as the easiest workflow is one IDE per developer per application. Kind of the way you might do it locally with, you've got a VM per application, right? And that way it'd be really easy for you to say, oh, I've got my IDE for branch A, application 1, and I've got a different IDE for branch 2, application 1, etc., and just keep things separate. But it is up to you. Just the only limitation is that each specific instantiated IDE is always associated with a given user and given application. You can destroy it, you can make another one, you can change your workflow however you want with that restriction.
And you have a way to configure permissions also. So it means if you're the subscription admin, you have access to 2 permissions to create and manage IDEs. So in case someone leaves your company, for instance, you can destroy the IDE without getting access to it, but at least you would be having this permission, so you can free up an ID so someone else can claim it in your entitlement.
Again, another question is, I have a lot of compliance restrictions in healthcare. So we don't work with developers outside the United States. So is there a way to keep people from like basically cloning your repo by using this? Or is it still possible? I guess, like, how could we restrict that access, which would make this more appealing, because then we could use international development where that we know that it would be more difficult for them to extract the code, right? Versus copy and paste.
I think you're asking a question that doesn't actually have a lot to do with IDEs. You know, the Git repo workflow is unaffected by whether you use an IDE or local development or live dev. That being said, there are Git strategies you could use. For instance, you could only give repo access to non-international developers. You could have a fork of your repository that you only give to your international developers, and you make sure you never push certain branches or commits to that. So this is really a question around Git flow and repository access. And I think you could definitely set up something that works for you using multiple remotes, and that will work with Cloud IDE, but Cloud IDE isn't the product that would introduce a feature for this.
Okay.
I've got a question for you, Matt, about the IPs here. Well, actually, it has to do more with SAML. So I have.
Oh God, Adam, what a this is gonna be a terrible question. Sorry, I just don't like SAML. That's all.
No, does anyone like SAML? No. No, this actually won't be too bad. I promise. So I have a an application that is very, very, very dependent on SAML for even local development. And we've configured our local environments, so local.mydomain.com to work with SAML. So we've exchanged the SAML metadata, and obviously SAML is highly dependent on the domain. So obviously we're not going to set up the domain over on the Cloud IDE. What I'm wondering, however, is how stable or persistent are the IPs on there? And could I set up a host file entry to point local.mydomain.com over to the Cloud IDE and get the Cloud IDE to respond to it?
I think these are not elastic IPs. I think the IPs, the IDEs change. So you could, I think, temporarily do it. And one day, eventually, the IP will change and you could update your local host file. So it'll probably work, but you're getting into uncharted territory.
It won't work,
right?
Because it's the same issue with ODEs that I have, right? Non-elastic.
No, well, no, the ODEs I don't even think will respond on those. So it's a little bit different. This one, with the control that you have, you definitely would be able to configure like Apache and other things to actually respond to those domains, whereas the ODEs will just kind of tell you, no, you suck.
Yeah, this is, I mean, literally, I think no one has ever tried what you're asking, Adam. So I can't be totally sure.
Yeah, that's generally the case.
What I know is we've been having the question about integrating with private packages, for instance.
Sure.
And you need to whitelist or create an allow list, I think, of IPs. And so we've been exploring giving you an IP range instead of giving you fixed IPs like that. So you can add those IPs to an allow list. An IP range, actually. We have communicated this to one of our customers willing to explore this solution, and we haven't heard back. So we don't know whether that works or not, but we know that's the only solution that we have right now to be able to manage this.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for this, I mean, it may not be justifiable. There may not be enough other weirdos who need this to justify it for you guys, and I get that. For us, we could probably experiment with it. It sounds like it will probably work. The only question is like, what level of configuration would we need to do on the Apache side to get Apache to just respond to that new domain? That's probably the only curveball.
And that's where I'm not sure it's going to work. Where the kind of high level disclaimer I gave at the beginning was most of the limitations are networking limitations.
Got it.
And I'm not sure how much you're going to be able to edit Apache configuration inside of the Cloud IDE, because we really want them to just keep working out of the box for the default use case, which is running a Drupal site. But I'm open to changing that. But it's, you know.
Yeah. So the one feature enhancement that might be to basically like allow some sort of UI or ACLI command to add host file entries, and then let people do whatever crazy things they want to do.
Yeah. I'm willing to consider that. There's a scope creep alarm bell going off in my head with it.
Yeah,
that's not a no.
Yeah, no, that's totally legit. You did say something interesting though, which is you said like something to the effect of keeping people from doing stupid things, because you want them to be able to do Drupal sites. So what if I do something really, really stupid and I blow up my machine? What do I do to get my to debug it, or to like get my Cloud IDE back into a serviceable state?
The way I see this is pretty much different from a lot of people I've been talking to. People want to keep their IDE forever, you know, in a workable state, even if they experiment, even if they try and break things at times. And I see IDEs as entirely disposable. I just create them, do some work, wipe them, recreate them again, because it's so easy to do. And I would never, ever do that with my local computer, because it's obviously so complicated to get everything back in order. But the way we've been envisioning IDEs, you know, is more about having something that is systematically the same exact environment with no environment disparity. And we like to think that, you know, every so often you would want to simply wipe everything and recreate everything from scratch. So instead of having to troubleshoot an issue with your server, because you can break things, you know, it really is your box in the cloud. So instead of having to troubleshoot everything, what about wiping it and recreating it again? That's a solution that works and that we like to, you know, recommend, you know, to our customers, because it's actually pretty powerful to do that.
That makes perfect sense. That sounds really good.
That's what I would do. It's the easiest thing. Throw it away and make another one. It's like running 2 commands.
Yeah, so easy.
Daniel has a question. What are the known major bugs and limitations that makes this product require more time to fix? Well, I don't know if there are major ones known that makes the product require more time to fix. Although I might be able to think of major limitations. I don't know. What are the major? Oh, backlog? Like, what are the major issues in the backlog? Is that the question, Daniel?
I'm basically asking, when I implemented pipelines, I later found out of a lot of the limitations. So what I'm concerned about is adopting a new flow, and then there's limitations that you guys are like, oh yeah, that's on our backlog, and then I'm just waiting.
You're looking for some bad news.
I need to know the good and bad, right? I want the Amazon review. I want the truth. Don't sell me the bright side of the coin here. I want to know what's the dirty side under my shoe.
All right, I'm happy to give that. I think the networking limitations are mostly is the category, it's the area where you're going to run into the most problems. If you're doing crazy multi-site stuff, this is like the Jeff Foxworthy, you might be a red angle. So you might have a bad time if you're doing crazy multi-site stuff, or you want to do crazy networking stuff. I don't really think we have lots of. I don't know, Aurelien, can you think of any big red flags in the backlog?
My recommendation, it's not really something that is in the backlog, but something that I've seen over time is, if you have too many assumptions that are being made in your code base based on the cloud platform, such as some logic based on certain environment variables that might be available that will not be available in Cloud IDE, you might have mismatched expectations, because it's a different way of seeing things. It's not tied to the cloud platform per se, except that it's, you know, easy for you to pull your DB code and files. It has a set of assumptions, and it's pretty opinionated to not be in the way. While the cloud platform and Site Factory are managed environments that we want to be, you know, scalable in a way that will work for the vast majority. So in Cloud IDE, we've made some assumptions that are a bit different from the cloud platform, and sometimes you might see differences. So for instance, if you install BLT, you might see differences in the cloud platform, and in IDEs potentially. Simple example, maybe there are some key differences that we need to be aware of and we need to fix. But essentially, what is in the backlog is not really different from what you have in mind or what you asked about already. It's about making sure that you can have a streamlined experience, making sure that we can listen to what you want to see in Cloud IDE, making sure that you have an environment that just works, that has everything that you need for Drupal development, and that is not in the way. So potentially you'll be seeing changes in the future where you will be seeing your backtrace right within the browser, because we talked about watchdog and syslog and tailing log files, but what about simply seeing your issues right within the browser page when you have a WSOD? This is not something that you need to hide because it's not a production environment. So everything we're doing and everything that is in the backlog right now is about making your experience streamlined and not in the way, because that's a dev box. You should be able to do a lot of things that you cannot do on the rest of the cloud platform.
But it's a lot of small things. It's not any big ones. Maybe I can think of two big-ish ones. One, which we already kind of mentioned, which is it's not FedRAMP compliant right now. We have FedRAMP customers that use it. You just have to be aware that you're using a non-FedRAMP compliant environment and modify your workflow. So don't put sensitive information in it, for instance.
Right, so not HIPAA either.
Well, okay, I'm not a compliance expert, but compliance experts have told me that it's fine to use for HIPAA and PCI as long as you don't put that sensitive, medical information or whatever in the IDE, right? So keep the credit card numbers and the medical information out of the environment, and you can use it. But yeah, don't go putting sensitive private information.
So scrub data is fine, but not non-scrub PHI.
Yeah, and that is a compliance law distinction, not an IDE distinction. So I defer to people who are experts on that rather than telling you what's allowed and what's not allowed. The other,
a hardware thing. So if it has to be HIPAA compliant,
right?
Like required basically in the container, and as long as it's that, then it's usable in the healthcare space. That's what I was wondering.
The other is these only run in US East region of AWS. And we actually have people internally, teams that develop on IDEs that are based in India, for instance, and it's fine. But I should just note that they're in that region. So there's some theoretical, I guess, latency that you could have if you're far away in other parts of the world, but it has not been a blocker for our internal teams.
But I'm at the other part of the world in France, and I'm not seeing any issues with using Cloud IDEs. The only issue that I see at times is with DNS propagation, which is not related to Cloud IDE, but to the actual DNS system.
But the actual implication of that is it might take 15 minutes before your new IDE's URL is available on the other side of the world. But that's like a one-time initial DNS propagation issue and not an ongoing issue with the product. So you might wait a few extra minutes when you create the new IDE. There's no CDN, there's no firewall, because you're not really using, you don't expect high traffic to these things, right? This is one developer using it. You don't really even want caching on barely because you're developing. All right.
Matt, that does, you mentioned no, does it have Solar or Varnish in it?
No, that's a great question. I should have thought of that one. Yeah, we haven't actually gotten that request much. I think some internal PS people raised that as a question. The Solar thing is on our roadmap, but you can very easily connect to a Solar instance that's on your dev or stage environment, right? It doesn't have to be a Solar instance that's in the IDE, so it's not a blocker. And the Varnish stuff, I'm not sure we should do it, honestly. You shouldn't think of it as a hosting environment. And I don't know if we want to try to duplicate Varnish behavior outside of IDE in the IDE.
Yeah, it's hard. That one's a bit of a philosophical thing, I suppose, because you can catch a lot of weird caching behaviors, or there's a lot of things that developers often miss when they don't have it, that all of a sudden only then start to appear in the upper environments, or the true ones. That's the only reason.
But it's the same thing as you're not going to catch CDN issues until it's in an upper environment. It's would you configure Varnish locally in order to catch Varnish problems upstream? maybe, but I'd probably not.
So do you know the first question that every single new Acquia customer asked to our support team? How do I disable Varnish in dev? Because it's in my way. I cannot do anything, and it's not working. It's caching everything, and people are like, "This is driving me mad." So I don't think we want to add Varnish here for that reason.
Yeah.
We should document this though, Aurelien.
Yes.
We should write down like
Yeah,
why we don't have Varnish in Cloud IDEs.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have 2 minutes left.
Adam used to work for Acquia, for those who don't know. So if you notice me being more casual or giving Adam a little bit of a hard time, that's my excuse. I used to work with him.
and I caused trouble.
And he's just a troublemaker. Yeah, that's the other reason. Sorry, Aurelien, you were trying to wrap up.
No, I was just saying we have 2 minutes left. If there's any final questions we can help you with, please ask away.
Yeah, I think this has been useful. I really appreciate all of the interaction. It makes me think maybe we should do another one of these if people liked it. But yeah, reach out to your TAM or your account manager or via support, or if you want to talk directly to me and Aurelien for whatever reason, you can request that and we'd be happy to talk to you all. So please just go try it.